1/3 less revenue. That's what happened to Coca-Cola in the beginning of 2003. And of course, that sounds horrible, but not only that, it meant something which did not only entail a complete change of their business model, but also it was the start for a digitization product. And let's face it, many of you might have spoken or thought about digitization, but when we look into reality, what did really happen? Today, we have an expert with us who did this digitization project in the Coca-Cola enterprise together with Hubertus Kuhn, another manager who worked there. Hello and welcome, Thorsten Jekel.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, Niels.
Thank you very much for taking the time. So when we now see there is a new law in place in the beginning of 2003, which means suddenly all cans have a deposit. Retail says we don't want to have that, so they take the product off the shelf. And now you suddenly, as Coca-Cola, have 1/3 less revenue. Couldn't one reaction just be, look, 1/3 less revenue means we don't make 5 billion revenue, we just make a tad less, like 3.8 billion is still okay, isn't it?
Actually, that was kind of the reaction that we saw within the Coca-Cola Germany organization because it didn't hurt enough. And that's my experience, that change does only happen when it really hurts. So that's in personal life and that's in digital life, in business life. And like other major corporations, it was when you are an employed manager, when you are still on your regular salary and you still get your bonuses from your last year, you kind of have a lower pressure than probably a solopreneur in current times.
So when you now have such a project, you have a project, 1/3 less revenue. How do you, without being brutal, make, I don't want to say put people into pain, but when you say it has to hurt enough, how do you make it hurt without being one of these stereotypical pressure-only managers?
And I even go one step before, it has to hurt, because that's the only way it works. In my experience, I've been a managing director in companies, and my own experience to say, which were my major failures? And my major failures were hiring the wrong people and sticking too long with the wrong people and not being very clear and focused enough. And the change within Coca-Cola started when they really changed the management, the top management. And number two, when they made it very clear to the people, so either we change or we die. And that means we as a German organization of Coca-Cola and you as a job holder. And that was the moment where people woke up. And I think that's really important to be clear. And I very often hear, oh, that's brutal and that's capitalism. And so, but when you look, my experience is also when you don't really sanctionize low performance, the major issue is that you are losing the high performers. Because they see, hey, all the management attention goes to the low performers. They get the same money, sometimes even more, and they get far more management attention. Me as a top performer, I get the same money and I don't get any management attention. So I change the company to a company where I get the attention I deserve. And that's one of the major things people overlook because they say, oh, we don't want to be brutal. You have to be brutal. And that doesn't mean to be unfair. And that is something which is not easy because really going into those talks is not easy. And you and me have held those talks. So it's not an easy job to do, but it can be done, and it has to be done in a very clear but fair manner.
Yeah. So when you say we have to be brutal, and we now, when we see who's listening to this podcast, we may have some people from the UK and many people from the US as well. Getting rid of someone in these countries is a bit easier. Let's face it, when you say you have a senior manager in a German organization who might be with you for 10, 15 or even more years, saying I get rid of you in Germany is not only legally challenging, but also, let's say, it can be quite pricey.
Absolutely. But what you always have to calculate is to say it's an investment. And Coca-Cola, for example, they calculated that to say, okay, yes, it costs us a lot of money to lay off those people because they were very generous in terms of paying the fees. Yes, but it is also like another cost or investment you have to take into. And of course, for smaller companies, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And to add on, and I've been in front of court when we were laying off people 2 times. And I won 2 times because you can also make your homework, and it's not impossible, and you can do it in a fair and manner way. So when you are what we call in German have a betriebsbedingte Kündigung, which is really something where you have a reason behind that. That is something where it's even possible in Germany, where you can lay off people, and you don't have to do it in unfair fair manner in terms of looking into their travel expenses or something like that. That's bad style. So that's not what you would do.
So you would say brutal, but not unfair. So you
Absolutely
support if someone says making a redundancy payment, redundancy payout, or paying a compensation to get rid of someone is a viable option.
Absolutely, because people, number one, those people who you lay off, they really recognize how you split up, and also the people within the organization. And I had it 10 years after I laid off somebody who was in his mid-50s, and I knew it was difficult to get him. I met him and he said, it was a hard time for me, but I still remember that you in your late 20s, I was 29 at that time, talked to me personally. You didn't have somebody from the personal department. You talked to me personally, you explained it to me, and you did it as fair as possible. And I still remember that. And also the people in the organization, they sense that. And within the Coca-Cola organization, for example, people knew, okay, they are very clear. If you don't perform, you are out. It's fair. And sometimes it's for both parties the best way to separate, and sometimes people woke up because my experience is the bottleneck is not technology. The bottleneck is always number one, leadership, it's management, and number two, that was the next step within the Coca-Cola organization, making your homework in terms of the structure. So like, which customers are we serving? Which clients are we not serving any longer? To say, how do we organize our sales areas? How is the pricing structure? And those things, and where people say, yeah, that's boring stuff. Yes, but to say who is doing the homework really in a consistent way. And then on that base, then use technology to make the processes faster and more customer-oriented.
So what do you think of the approach? Because, of course, I prepared for this interview. Some people say we are a large organization, and from a large organization, you always have non-performers. Why not accept them? So you work with 75% people who do perform, and the other 25%, you simply accept that they are not top performers. You just live with it, and they will leave sooner or later. What do you think of that approach?
The problem is the performance will leave and the low performance will stay. So that's a problem you always have. So therefore, it never works. And therefore, I learned it the hard way actually, because I didn't lay off people fast enough. It is better for all sides, definitely, to be very clear but fair. And that's something what you can do. So sometimes people are, I always say, be soft in tone but hard in the issue. And a lot of people are hard in the tone but soft in the issue. Don't know where that translates, but I think it's very important to be really hard and concise in the terms of the measure and the targets. And that was something where Ulrich Nehammer, for example, was extremely harsh, where he said, okay, like talking about coolers, it took Coca-Cola 4 weeks to bring a cooler to a customer. When a customer said, I want to have
a branded fridge from Coca-Cola, branded fridges for the retail store.
Absolutely. And it took them 4 weeks. And they say it's 4 weeks without turnover for the client, no turnover for Coca-Cola, and the possibility that Red Bull or other competitors are kicking in. And then what he did is he asked the magical question. He didn't ask to say, how can we speed that up a bit? He said, what do we have to do to strip that down from 4 weeks to 24 hours?
That's a bit of a goal, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it was, first thing, it was completely silent in the room.
Yeah, of course.
The second reaction, that people said, that's not possible.
Yeah.
And the cool thing is he didn't discuss the goal. He said, we can discuss everything. We can even discuss whether we will probably make it not this year, but by the end of next year. That's okay. So we can discuss that. But we can't discuss the target. It's 24 hours, full stop, and latest by the end of next year. So, and now let's discuss, what do you need in terms of IT, in terms of structure, in terms of management support? What do you need to do that, to reach that goal? And that is something which I see very rarely, because most of the time managers are very strict on what to do, but very flexible on what to achieve. And I think it's far more important to do it the other way around, to say, that's the target, and now let's discuss to say, what do you need? How can I support you to achieve that target? And which technology can help us to do that? So kind of like with coolers, just a practical example, they very often had it that a sales guy sold a cooler and then it was delivered 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and that was an inch too wide. And then said, so now we have to send it back. And now they have an augmented reality tool, and that's no rocket science. So that's easy with the current iPads, and that was even available 3 years ago already. So where they measure it, and when a client says, I would like to have that cooler, then the sales rep can see, sorry, it's an inch too wide, but this cooler fits. So, and that reduces the possibility that there is a wrong delivery. Plus, when they say, which products do we need, then they combine the ERP information, the customer relationship management information, the social media information, Nielsen market information, and make a suggestion to say, based on where you're located, what you have ordered in the past, and other clients and competitors here around, that would be a very good suggestion for you to maximize your turnover. And client turnover and Coca-Cola turnover is usually kind of in sync, so therefore with a joint benefit, and their technology can help. But first of all, when they wouldn't have been so consistent in terms of that's the goal, technology wouldn't have been so strong and powerful.
Then, of course, there's one question which arises now, where to start? When I say digitization, I want to make it happen. We need the change, especially right now. There is the chance to change because we have to change due to the circumstances. And I'm sitting somewhere in senior management. Where to start?
Yeah, first thing is to say, why? So what do we want to achieve? And the only reason to do that is to be either faster or to deliver better to the customer. When technology just adds cost or complexity, then it doesn't make a sense. It's like I say, the paperless office is no value in itself. The value is when you say you have all the information available for all the people who are serving the client, even when they're not in the office. That's the value. So number one, to say, what do we want to achieve? That is the first starting point. Then number two, to say, okay, what is our homework which we can do in terms of the structure? And then the third step is to say, which technology do we already have? Because most of the time we already have invested a lot of technology, and we are usually using just 3% of the existing technology. So that helps to say, like, very concrete example, a lot of organizations are already having Office 365 and just using Outlook, and that's it, basically. And that's a good start to see which technology do we have.
So, and of course, the final question, when we now have one of these changes in place, many people will say, of course, the board is a big fan of this change because they don't have to deal with it. No one from the CEO board or from the headquarters, no one is out there with the client. I face all the problems, and they celebrate each other just for doing this project at my cost. So how do I overcome this problem that people often say, we are out here with the client, and so you are sitting somewhere in your ivory tower making your decision, having no clue what we face during our everyday business?
Yeah, absolute superb question, because it's really, that was one of the keys within the Coca-Cola organization, is that the CEO Ulrich Nehammer went out, and he went out incognito. Because he saw that some of the sales reps didn't use the iPad, which they roll on undercover. Yeah. And then they said, okay, please could I have a list of those reps who didn't use the iPad for the last 3 months and who don't know me. So 1,400 sales reps, not everybody knows the CEO. And then Monday morning, 7 a.m., he was in front of the house from the sales rep, said, hi, I'm a guy from Berlin, from head office. I would like to join you for the day. So, okay, wasn't announced, but okay, come with me. And then at the first client, the sales rep pulled out his paperwork and said, yes, and cooler and super. And within 4 weeks, you will have that.
Mm-hmm.
And when they drove to the next client, Ulrich said, why didn't you do it with your iPad? Say, oh, no, that's so complicated. And the client doesn't want it. So they find it disturbing technology. And so, and then Ulrich said, is it okay for me if I do it with the next client? And of course, he was trained, and then he was with the next client.
The CEO went on operational level sales to do it on site with an actual existing client.
Yeah, absolutely. So he went there with an iPad and said, okay, have a look, and which cooler do you want? And then the client said, oh, I would like to have to that. Said, so sorry, that's an inch too wide. But I can recommend this one. And then I said, okay, yeah, we take that. And then he said, what do you want to order? We have a recommendation here. Say, Bob, say, super. And then the client said, where can I sign it? Said, just here on the iPad. And then the client says, okay, 2 or 3 weeks. And said, 2 or 3 weeks? Tomorrow you will have the stuff. Tomorrow afternoon, I have a look at that. 4 p.m. you have everything there. Well, the client was excited, so the sales rep said, hey, the first one from head office who I can take to the customer. And then with the next client, so he did it again, and after 2-3 clients, Ulrich said, okay, now it's your turn. And the cool thing is when Ulrich left the car, so what does the sales rep do? Of course, call his best friend, say, hey, guy, today I had somebody from head office here with the client, and that was the first guy from head office who you could really take out to the client. Said, so what was his name? Said, oh, don't know. Just have a look. I wrote it down. Ulrich Nehammer. And then I said, are you kidding? That is our CEO who was with you today.
Change of color.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, I wasn't in that car. I would have loved to see the change of color in his face. Yeah. And believe me, that didn't take 2 days. It took hours being widespread in the whole organization. And this is coming back to your question, a long answer to a very smart question, to say it's really important. And as a father of a daughter, I also have the experience. You can talk to your people, you can talk to your kids, but don't tell, show. Just do it. And of course, the top management doesn't have to be the better sales rep. It's a bit like Jürgen Klopp. He's not the best soccer player, but he knows how to play soccer, and therefore he is so successful. And that's the same principle in business.
Yeah, excellent. So when people are now listening to this and say, wow, that's a great example, we want to start right now. To wrap this whole interview up, Thorsten, what are Thorsten Jekel's top 3 tips to start with digitization right now?
Yeah, so first tip, start on the top of the CEO. It's not the digital natives driving the digital change, it's top management, number one. Number 2, make your homework in terms of structure. Number 3, look which technology are you already paying and how can you use it, and ask your people, because they usually have a quite good idea on how to do that.
Excellent. Of course, I'm going to put your contact data in the show notes of this podcast so people can contact you directly when they have any additional ideas which they want to discuss you, or if they, which I can only highly recommend, hire you as their consultant or speaker for their conference. Yeah, so at the end of this interview, Thorsten, there's only one thing for me left to say. Thorsten, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me on your show, dear Niels.